This is Metro Week. Our top story, what does the proposed state budget mean for local governments? We'll ask top city and county officials for details.
There will be indirect impacts because of the reduction in spending countywide.
Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
I'm Andrea Kelly. When Governor Doug Ducey took office this month, he invited leaders from throughout the state to tell him about issues they are dealing with. One of them was Tucson Mayor Jonathan Rothschild. Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover caught up with Rothschild in Phoenix.
You had a chance to sit down with the governor. First of all, what did the two of you talk about?
The governor really wanted to reach out, and probably his primary expression was that he wants Tucson to be more at the table at the state level. He wants to be down here more often. He wants to make sure that for certain appointments, whether it be the Arizona Commerce Authority or the Mexican-American Commission, that there's more Tucson representation. And of course, I expressed that I was very much in favor of those things, that I thought not only was it good for Tucson, but getting that perspective was good for Arizona.
What did you tell the governor we in southern Arizona need from his office, from the legislature as that session gets going?
Well, we talked principally about doing trade with Mexico, keeping those relations open, getting the infrastructure that was necessary both in Mexico and Tucson. We talked about dealing with state lands. We talked about expansion of the Arizona Commerce Authority, all things that will drive our economy to a better place and with more focus on southern Arizona.
Because, of course, southern Arizona seems to be lagging behind Phoenix a little bit, or the Metro Phoenix area in jobs. So I guess the governor's hoping a rising tide lifts all boats, especially southern Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy with the fact that we're seeing things on the positive side for the first time in a number of years. And in a larger market, you see larger numbers. But we have to accelerate what we're doing here. And we really can't do it on our own. We have to do it with the help of the state. And probably not having some of that help in the past has contributed somewhat to not getting the places where we want to be.
This seems like a pretty open relationship, something different. I know he's called you on the phone,
yeah.
Now you've sat down with him. This seems a little different.
Yeah, I will say that this governor is making the effort, and that's something that's important. It's something I'm not going to turn down. Will I agree with him on all issues? Certainly not. But if I can have a relationship where we're working together on some issues, that might mean every now and then I can say, hey, Governor, how about on this? Have you thought about it a little differently? That would be a wonderful relationship for Tucson to have.
Now we'll take a look at how Governor Ducey's proposed budget could affect local governments. Joining me in the studio is Deputy Tucson City Manager Kelly Gottschalk and Pima County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry. Thank you both for coming in today. I'd like to start by talking about transportation. We have spent the last years, more than a decade, talking about changes to transportation funding because the state has been using what's usually going to cities and counties to pay for road maintenance instead to pay for other parts of the state budget. What's happening with that portion of the budget in Governor Ducey's proposal? And we'll start with you, Chuck.
Well, it's really they're holding harmless the HERF revenues. We had experienced in the past many years of what are called transfers or shifts, where the Highway User Revenue Fund, really intended to maintain and build our streets and highways, has been used to fund state agencies. That was reduced by $30 million last year, and we'd hoped it would continue to be reduced so that it would be phased out. The current budget increases the vehicle license registration, and it really offsets some of the reductions that have been made in the past. It really doesn't, it probably, I think, is equivalent. It kind of holds the fund harmless. It's possible, though, however, looking in 2017 or the following year, that there'll be a further reduction in HERF revenues through these transfers of $30 million. What we're really interested in is, yes, getting those transfers out of HERF, but more importantly, HERF is so grossly underfunded now in maintaining our street and highway system. We need a major revenue initiative, whether it's a gas tax or some other type of revenue to increase HERF so that it can actually adequately fund transportation systems of counties and cities and towns.
So before we get to the new sources of revenue, you're saying the cities and counties are not going to lose any more of that transportation funding this year. It'll be the same as last year, or it will be $30 million more?
It'll be about the same as last
Okay.
year. And so what's happening is by raising one tax, they're able to take some of the state general fund out of that equation to support the Department of Public Safety.
And replacing that with the vehicle registration that we
correct.
pay for our cars. And you're talking about a new source of revenue. You've proposed a county gas tax, that's right?
We proposed raising the state gas tax,
Okay.
10 cents a gallon. What we think is that solves all problems. It solves the state's problem, solves cities and towns' problems, as well as the county problem. We haven't raised a gas tax in Arizona in 24 years. The state legislature between 1960 and 1990 raised the gas tax 9 times in response to growing Arizona demands. Unless we increase our transportation revenues, we're not going to be able to fix our roads. And more importantly, we will not be economically competitive with other states.
And Kelly, the city says that even if the state is fully funding transportation and not sweeping the money into other areas of the budget, there still isn't enough money to pay for road maintenance, right? The same thing Chuck's saying?
Absolutely, and just the structure of the gas tax is flawed because it's based on a per gallon tax instead of a revenue tax. So as vehicles become more and more fuel efficient, it's just generating less revenue and the costs are going up. So it's something that needs to be adjusted.
I'm going to turn to kind of a more general question. How does the city of Tucson fare in the budget proposal that we have right now? Actually,
we were pleased with the recommended budget at this point. It does have a reduction, which we're never pleased with, but given the shortfall that the state was projecting, I think we had anticipated it not to be as positive. So at this point, we're looking for about $1.2 million reduction worst case, and the governor has projected that some of that will be made up by increased revenues from the revenue collections.
So you're saying that since the state was looking at potentially $1 billion deficit in the next fiscal year, 1.2 million, not such a big hit for the city?
That's correct, and that's the direct impact. There will be indirect impacts because of the reduction in spending countywide.
Okay. And Chuck, can you expand on some of what those other direct impacts? The county has a few more direct impacts. What are some of those?
Yeah, we're probably a lot more concerned about the proposed budget than cities and towns, and it's because this is a budget that asked the county to contribute almost an additional $10 million to support the state. And it continues a trend that's kind of been occurring over the years. Not many people think or realize that 1/3 of our property tax goes to the state to support their programs. This year alone, $86 million of property taxes are being levied on behalf of the state and sent to the state to support state programs. This particular budget increases that by $10 million, or nearly 14%. So that's a pretty good increase that we aren't expecting. And frankly, we've got nowhere to get the money because our budget is based about 80% on property tax. So that means all we're going to do is pass along that money or that tax increase to the public. And unfortunately, they're going to have to pay it. And it is unfortunate. I don't know what can be done, but we're very concerned about several provisions of this, and one of them is the 1% cap on residential property taxes going away, and actually any county that exceeds that is being then asked to prorate the excesses among the various taxing jurisdictions, and that's the county, that's the school districts, and unfortunately even the city. And so we think that that's probably flawed. Had some pretty good conversations with the governor's office recently about why we think that's flawed and particularly punitive to both Pima County and Pinal County. And I think we're getting some positive reception that there may be other ways to do it because the current way I think is flawed.
Okay, and I'm just going to try and again put some of that into layman's terms. So you're saying as the state budget needs to make up for some of the revenue that's declining, it's turning to the counties and saying you need to pay for more state services, and you're putting that number at it's going to be about 96 million next fiscal year. And then so the only source of revenue the county has is to turn to taxpayers and property tax, but the state is limiting how much you can collect. Is that right?
Yes, the short version is the state is telling the county to give it more money. So I guess the state can say we're not raising taxes, but in reality, we're raising taxes, the county, for the state.
And of course, those of us who pay those taxes, we aren't multiplying. We have to pay state and county and city taxes all together. And you're concerned about some of the tax collection in the city of Tucson and the cost of tax collection. Can you explain what that is?
I am concerned. Although the budget was basically stable for the city from the governor, there is legislation that we're concerned about, which is they're calling it the cleanup legislation from the transaction privilege tax simplification bill from last year, and that could actually have a larger impact on us depending on what the state does with that.
Explain what that, functionally, what that costs the city and why.
So right now, the way they've changed some of the tax collections, we used to be the city collected it, and now the state's going to collect the tax for us. And we're concerned that they won't be as attentive to our collections as we always have been. You always collect your money better than somebody else collects it for you.
You're talking about the city sales tax.
Sales tax, yes. And now they're changing the rules on contracting tax. So instead of paying a contracting tax based on where you live, regardless of where you shop, now some of it will be point of sale. And depending on how they define pieces of that, it's more or less of a loss to the cities.
And do you have a dollar figure on that yet?
We're still estimating that because that's still, the legislation is still being negotiated at this time.
And that comes on top of some concerns about some similar legislation about sales tax collection last year.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
It's on top of that.
What is the cumulative effect of all of these things we're talking about? I mean, we're talking about years of either shifts out of county and city budgets into the state budget, or reductions in sales tax or tax collections to pay for state services. Overall, what does that mean to someone who lives in Pima County?
Well, the cumulative impact is that I think people don't really realize that a third of the property tax bill they get from the county goes to the state. And that trend continues, and it looks like it's going to increase. And we have nowhere to go except the people who pay property taxes. And people are going to wonder why we had to raise their property tax again. And well, the answer is the state shifted programs and cost.
And the more people pay in taxes, whether they're city taxes, county taxes, or state taxes, there's less money for disposable income, which means less sales taxes. People can have less to, buy the things they need for their families.
And how do each of your governments, and I'll start with you, Kelly, on this one, how do each of your governments deal with communicating this, what we're talking about here, to the legislature through lobbying or through in your case, the League of Cities and Towns? Are there effective ways to tell the lawmakers what's happening locally?
We're very active with our internal intergovernmental people, working directly through the Arizona League of Cities. We also have lobbyists, and there's various groups. So there's a finance director group, there's an intergov group, there's a city manager group, and we're all talking to those people, whether it be directly to the legislatures or through the League of Cities or through our lobbyists, so they understand really what is the impact. And we really try to pick out those things that really matter. There's, I think, over 600 bills already introduced. They all don't matter to us, but when they do, we want to make sure that they know the impact to the cities.
And Chuck, you have your own lobbying team and the Association of Counties.
We have the County Supervisors Association, our supervisors. I do. We have a lobbyist, and that lobbyist is meeting with the governor's office yesterday and today about the property tax rebate. So we're making some headway, and there's some positive communications occurring at this point in time.
All right. Well, we'll keep updating this as the budget actually gets developed through the legislative cycle. Thank you both. And we'll be right back with the Journalist Roundtable.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Next on Arizona Week, an in-depth look at the cuts to education.
These are not catastrophic cuts by any stretch, and we don't characterize them that way. The point, though, is that it's really the accumulation of the cuts that have been taking place over time.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio is my colleague Christopher Conover and Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, along with Thelma Grimes of Inside Tucson Business. Thank you all for coming in today. I appreciate it. Tim, let's pick up on the conversation we just had. Do you think many local taxpayers or local residents are aware that some of the local government tax and budget decisions are a result of the state budget decisions?
No, in a word. No, I mean, very few people are familiar with the intricacies of how tax money may be collected by the state, or say collected by the cities and funneled to the state and then funneled back to the cities or counties. No, it's not something that most people are aware of.
I think it's an interesting point that Chuck Huckleberry brought up when he was discussing that and saying, the state is taking more money from the county, and the only way the county can make it up is to raise taxes. So the state doesn't raise taxes, the county does, the state doesn't get the blame. As Tim said, I don't think most people get that. They just know their taxes went up. So in the end, the state may actually end up taking some of the blame, and they're kind of riding the fence down the middle. No, we did not actually raise taxes, but Huckleberry will say, sure you did. You just made me do it and be the bad guy.
And we all are the taxpayers, and we pay either way, and so the bottom line is our taxes go up, really. Thelma, you got a chance this week to talk to Oro Valley and Marana officials. What was their general response to some of the impacts that they're going to see from the proposed state budget?
I think this goes a little bit to what you asked Tim. It goes to how does it really affect us directly, and talking to the local mayors, you get some of that idea. And like Mayor Hiremath in Oro Valley, he mentioned, just like the county administrator, you've got to raise your own taxes and find those revenue streams to make up for where the state has cut, especially since 2010. Impact fees, the HERF funds, it goes down the list, and each year they have to find the way to still balance their budget, still pave the roads, and still make up for that. And like Mayor Honey and Marana said, I don't care if the state balances their budget, I still have to pay my cops, I still have to pave the roads.
That was actually a quote in the story, and so he's concerned about making sure that road maintenance is covered. And Satish Hiremath, the mayor of Oro Valley, he was a little bit concerned about how the state government seems to not be looking to collaborate with cities. How are they doing? I asked this question of Chuck Huckleberry and Kelly Gottschalk on lobbying. How do they get that message to the state that this hurts them and they have to make decisions because of it?
Mayor Hiremath and Mayor Honey from Marana, they both agreed that there just seems to be less and less discussion before these budgets are proposed with the actual municipalities. What do you guys need? So then once the budgets are out, then they have to react and they have to talk to their legislatures and here you guys need to know this is going to affect us directly. So, kind of the timing. I know Satish Hiremath said he would love to be talked to well before the budget even comes out, to be able to say these are our issues every year.
Go ahead.
Sorry, well, it comes back to how our political system works, though, doesn't it? Especially in an election year. The governor came in promising no new taxes, and that was a promise that he really was not going to be able to go back on, as unwise as I think it was. So therefore, yeah, that's politically speaking, that's the only way he can do it is to pass. There are demands, there are needs, and granted, I think he's right. There are efficiencies to be found still in government, but you're going to have to push off those tax increases or needs for more revenue on other governmental entities.
Right, and he's right on that. You still can find where you can be more efficient in that budget, but you have $500 million shortfall to start off with. And Mayor Hiremath brought up you have to look at other revenue streams eventually.
And Christopher, what are some of those other revenue streams that the legislature might be considering? What bills have we seen so far about raising revenue through either taxes or generating economic development?
The big one is going to be economic development with this legislature. This legislature is not going to be willing to raise taxes or put off even some tax breaks. The suggestion was made that there are some tax breaks for businesses that are about to come on the books, which will obviously, tax breaks means fewer taxes, less money coming in. Suggestions were made, let's keep those on the books, but let's push them out a couple more years. Let's solve this budget problem and then put them in. And there was a very quick, resounding no from the governor's office and the majority. The legislature next week starts their budget debate in the committees. We'll see how things work out. We're also dealing with two different sets of numbers between the legislature and the governor, which again is one of those things that I don't think most people know about. The governor's budget, the legislature's budget, it's all based on predictions of how much money the state will take in. The governor is predicting the state will take in more money than the legislature is predicting. So we could see even more cuts potentially if we went with the legislature's numbers. It's this big balancing act that in some ways is very theoretical initially, and as we go through the process becomes less theoretical and more real.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to the question that we've discussed here before, whether tax cuts are going to bring in more, produce so much economic growth that they might bring in more revenue. And the research I've seen in a situation like ours says, well, it may bring in a little more revenue. It's not going to be enough to offset the revenue lost from the cuts, if you know what I mean.
It doesn't appear that the legislature and the governor have a lot of differences. Do we see this budget really having any major changes from the proposed budget?
It'll be interesting as we go. The legislative leadership, the House Speaker, Senate President, and the governor held a news conference last week before the governor released his budget, and they all stood together. We have never seen that happen. It is a naturally adversarial relationship when it comes to the budget. This one looks to be less adversarial, though we already did see where the legislature raised its hand and said, no, this is wrong over some funding for veterans-related issues. The governor wanted to move some money around, and some members of the legislature as a veterans group stood up and said, no, we're not going to do this, and the governor already backed off on it. I don't foresee a lot of big changes, but at the end of the day, they still have to come up with a budget within the reality, whatever reality they are dealing with, which set of numbers they're dealing with. So there can be some changes, but probably not huge major changes.
Can you lay out what the budget process looks like kind of in step by step? So we got a proposal from Governor Ducey at the end of last week. What's next?
What's next is that is a wish list, if you will. The legislature is under no legal obligation to take the governor's budget and simply pass it. Now, everybody's of the same party, and it looks like we're going to play nicely together, at least for the time being. The legislature will start hearings this coming week on a budget. They're going to start with the governor's budget kind of as a baseline and start tweaking that up and down. We'll go through a number of committee hearings in both the House and Senate. Will then come together for one large budget in each chamber, and then it's up to the other chamber to pass its own budget. And of course, the House budget will be a little different than the Senate budget, most likely. Negotiators from the two will get together and begin hashing out the differences. At some point, the governor does become involved again, because the governor has to sign off eventually. And we've seen in the 10 years I've been here plenty of fights between the legislature and Governor Napolitano, the legislature and Governor Brewer. I'm sure we will see some between the legislature and Governor Ducey. So the governor's office gets involved in that negotiation between the two chambers. All three parties then come up with something that they can all live with. Is everybody thrilled and happy? Not usually, but it's a compromise. And then it's passed in the two chambers and signed by the governor. That's, in the most basic sense, what happens. We won't get into the party politics between the minority and the majority and all of that.
Okay. And Tim, Governor Brewer spent a lot of speeches during her time in office talking about how she inherited one of the worst budget situations in the state's history, and she solved it, and that one of her legacies was kind of fixing the state budget, getting through that recession. Does this need that we still find the state in a position to have to cut the budget or raise revenue? Does it speak to whether that legacy is actually a legacy at this point, or,
well, sure,
or what she wants it to be?
Absolutely. Obviously, no, it didn't work out the way she had hoped. She got some tax cuts passed. She got that 1 cent sales tax increase that lasted a few years passed, but then it had a sunset, and so the revenue's gone from that. So as a result, no, it's still a structurally imbalanced budget. Now, Governor Ducey says the way we're going to get away from that is by cutting spending. That is, we're going to structurally balance it by cutting spending. There's a real question as to whether that's doable.
And we've heard that every year, and yet find ourselves in this position again every year. Christopher?
And one of the things, again, going back to how much money the state has to work with, the tax collections, you hear the president in the State of the Union this week, Governor Ducey has talked about it, the recovery is on. We've recovered from the recession. If you look at the numbers, Arizona is still recovery-wise behind the rest of the nation. Even this week when unemployment numbers came out, our unemployment rate in Arizona is 6.7% for December, the most recent numbers we have, and that's almost a full point higher than the rest of the nation. So our recovery is still behind, which means less spending by consumers, which means less tax dollars, fewer tax dollars going in to state coffers for people to work with.
Tim, in our city and county interview, we didn't talk about cuts to education. Mm-hmm. You wrote a column about that this week, the cuts to the University of Arizona and Pima Community College. And you said that in some ways you could argue those cuts are a more predictable path for the U of A. What did you mean by that? It's still cutting the budget, right?
Right, yeah. Well, this is the argument I think the governor would make, that we are going to get down. He laid out his plan for funding the universities as a way to establish a new baseline, essentially, a new relationship, I think is the word he used, between the state and the universities. And basically, it's a relationship where the state doesn't give the universities as much as it used to. So, and that, of course, potentially forces the universities to go look for other sources of revenue.
Which typically has been tuition in the last few
years.
years.
Yeah, but the big, so there's kind of a rock and a hard place here, that the regents are committed to not raising tuition anymore. The state's committed to not giving any more funding to the universities any more than they have, or in fact cutting funding. And so how that's going to be resolved, well, it's going to be interesting to see.
Well, and the regents came out and said we're not going to raise tuition before the regents came out and said that. Michael Crow, the president of ASU, came out and flat said we're not going to raise tuition, which then puts pressure on the University of Arizona and NAU to follow suit, and not raise tuition. But less people think this is only an Arizona problem. Former Governor Napolitano is now head of the University of California. She's in a little bit of a political war with Governor Brown of California. She wants to raise tuition at the University of California. Governor Brown doesn't want it to happen. So this is not a unique to Arizona problem. It just affects us and our viewers because this is where we live.
And Thelma, I want to switch topics a little bit here, unless you have more to add on that one. No? Okay. So we've talked with you here in past weeks about this situation with the town of Oro Valley's decision to purchase the El Conquistador Country Club and Golf Course. There's been some developments with that in the last few weeks. Can you give us, first the background? The purchase went through, the town voted to purchase that, correct?
Yes, so in December, the town voted to purchase the Hilton El Conquistador Country Club and Golf Course for $1 million, 3 equal payments, starting on March 1st. And then they also voted to increase sales taxes for the operation and maintenance of that. So with that, the citizens got together and pulled together to get a referendum in order. They actually gathered quite a few more than the signatures they needed. They needed about 1,100. They turned in 3,100.
And those signatures were an initiative to overturn that vote.
So what it would have done is sent the measure to a vote. So then the people would decide, not the council, which was in a 4-3 vote that they opted to buy it. So then there became a technicality on those petitions where the city clerk said that they had to be rejected because they used a resolution number versus a serial number.
So how does this work? It's really complicated to me because it couldn't go to a vote before the city is scheduled to purchase the property, right? So can the city first purchase the property and then have a vote to not purchase the property? Or how does that work?
So the way I understand it is if the referendum would have been held up, it would have gone to May vote. And then it would have been up to the owner, HSL Properties, if they wanted to wait through May or if they wanted to maybe go find another suitor in the meantime. Yeah, because March 1st was the date to actually close the deal. So that's the way I understand it would have worked, is they had to hold it legally until May if the petitions would have been held up. The other interesting part on the petitions was when they were told a day before the due date on January 16th that they'll likely be rejected, residents got together, pulled another petition, and they were 78 signatures short that day. So in one day, they tried to do it again.
Can they keep trying this, or as one attempt?
No, there's a deadline on that. So January 16th was the deadline.
Just to clarify for some of our viewers who may not live up in the Oro Valley area, we're talking about the El Conquistador Hotel, which was sold to HSL Properties.
Right.
What we're talking about here is the Country Club, which is actually a couple of miles away. It was part of the same facility, if you will, but it's a separate facility. It's at the corner of La Cañada and Lambert, right. I think. Or kind of up in that area. It's a little different facility than the actual hotel. The city of Oro Valley is not buying the hotel to operate the hotel.
HSL Properties wanted the resort. They didn't want the golf course part. And the town of Oro Valley, Mayor Hiermath, they're looking at it as a potential community center.
So is this a done deal? Is it a done sale?
Based on what I'm hearing, the referendum effort is now going to go to court.
Okay.
And they're going to challenge it through court. So I don't know how long.
All right, well, we'll probably ask you about that again in future weeks. And of course, the state budget will be a topic all the way through until the next budget cycle starts. So thank you all for coming in this week. That's it for this show this week. For more on this week's news, including stories that aired on NPR 89.1, go to our website. Now Arizona Week takes a closer look at what the proposed state budget means for education throughout the state.